Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Frustrated to Fluent. I'm your host, Devon Bruce, and we help non-native English-speaking medical professionals in healthcare communicate effectively with their patients, colleagues, and staff. And today I'm speaking with Maya Dajon. She's an award-winning relationship coach, motivational speaker, SAG-AFTRA artist, and founder of Chill Vibrations. With a story of resilience, rising from living in her car to earning a full scholarship to UCLA and becoming a commencement speaker, Maya's journey reflects strength and determination. During COVID, she built a thriving coaching practice to support individuals struggling with relationships. Later, she earned a master's degree in clinical psychology to expand her work as a therapist, and she empowers individuals and couples to navigate life transitions, build self-love, and create meaningful, lasting relationships. So, Maya, thank you so much for being here.
Of course. Thank you for having me. I can't wait to talk with you today.
Yes, I'm so excited to talk about this because this is one of those things that get overlooked. You know, a lot of people focus on like perfecting their grammar or, making sure they can write that email, which is important, of course. But that's why we focus on bridging the language gap in the academy because I'm working with someone right now. I forgot where she's from. She's a medical researcher and she moved to the States about a year ago. And in her home country, she was extremely fluent on paper. So when she came over here, she thought she was not going to have any problems. Well, the reason why that I'm working with her as a personal client right now is because she's like, Devin, when I came over here, I had absolutely no idea what people were saying to me because the textbook English and the working man's English are different. And a lot of that is based in cultural differences and cultural nuances, which is something that you're an expert in. So I am extremely excited to talk to you about this today.
Yes, of course.
All right, so let's get straight to it. What are some unique challenges non-native English speaking healthcare professionals face when working in multicultural environments?
Yeah, so I would say when I'll just speak from colleagues that I've worked with personally. I have colleagues that are immigrants and they come here and they have challenges because of cultural differences. And I would say that the most challenges I hear them saying to me is not being able to feel comfortable advocating for themselves when it comes to their culture and the things that they have as a foundation that they grew up with, and having to diminish themselves in order to fit in. I would say that
Yeah.
is one of the things that I hear a lot from colleagues that I work with.
That's so true. And I hear that on the language side because they already feel that they're looked at as less than because they
Yeah.
have an accent, because they're an immigrant. So they really try hard to fit in. But then when there is an actual cultural difference, they don't feel like they have the right to speak up or they don't want to come across as they're being difficult and things like that. So yeah, I hear that on my end as well.
Yes, exactly. And another thing that I noticed quite often is it makes me think of a conversation I had with one of my colleagues who came from India. And she completed all of her degrees. She was a therapist in India. But when she came here to the States, to California, she had to do the whole program again. So that was very frustrating, having to learn something all over again, even though she had the foundation, but she had to learn it from a different cultural foundation, and having to do the work all over and start from scratch and be an associate therapist instead of a full, licensed therapist like she was in India.
Yeah, that's gotta be tough. And like I said, I hear that on my end where they're working as a doctor in their native country and then they come here and they have to basically start from square
Start
one.
from scratch.
And that can be really challenging and also very expensive.
Yes. Yes.
Very, very expensive. Now, how can healthcare professionals overcome feelings of imposter syndrome that stem from language or cultural barriers? Because that is huge. They
Huge.
feel so othered that imposter syndrome is real, even if they are extremely fluent and they speak perfect English. If they have imposter syndrome, the struggle can be real for them. So yeah, how can they overcome these feelings?
It really sits home for me. It hits home because my father was an immigrant from Trinidad and he had a very
Mm.
strong accent and he came here to the States and he worked his way up. He received his PhD and became a psychologist. However, he has a very thick accent and sometimes it's hard for him, for people to understand him. And I would say how professionals in the healthcare field can work through that imposter syndrome is number one, find a community. That's first and foremost. Find your people, find your tribe, because your tribe is going to be out there. So I remember there was a time when I was at UCLA and there were some students who were immigrants and they were struggling to find their place. However, there were clubs and networking events that were dedicated for them. So I would say when you're an adult and a working professional, find your tribe, find your people. And there are resources like meetup.com where they have all different types of clubs and organizations catered towards your culture and also the organizations for your specific career. Like, for example, I'm a marriage and family therapist. So I'm in what's called CAMP, which is California Marriage and Family Therapist organization. And in that organization, there are specific groups for Black therapists, and then there's another group for therapists of color. There's a group for therapists who are East Indian. There's all different types of groups. So finding your tribe really helps you to connect with your community. And that can diminish a lot of those feelings of imposter syndrome because your people are going through the same things and you can talk those things out. Also, having a therapist that is from your own culture and community and working through that imposter syndrome with them as well is very important. So those two things I would say is the strongest areas that I found that other people have said that help them. And when I work with patients on the clinical side that deal with that, that's what I suggest to them as well.
Those are fantastic. Fantastic. That was one of my inspirations for starting the academy because I've been an English coach for years. And one thing that I noticed over time, because I've worked with doctors exclusively for almost 5 years. Well, we recently expanded, so I'm working with all people in healthcare now through the academy, thank goodness. But one thing that I've noticed is that they feel so alone. They
Yes.
feel like they are on an island of one. And
Mhm.
once I figured out that that is a huge pain point for them, I completely restructured my academy. And at the time of this recording, I just relaunched about 3 weeks ago and we're growing, which is great, but we're already seeing results. We have this thing called
Yeah.
1 Minute English, and it's basically to plant that little nugget of English every day. 'Cause a lot of people feel like they just don't have the time. And just doing that, having a sense of community, of working on a goal with your English has been transformative. And
Wow.
like I said, it's only been 3 weeks. I've had people
Mm.
speak up at a meeting. She's a pediatrician and she spoke up at a meeting and they love her idea. I had another member who is a medical student and he wanted to speak to a colleague in English because he thinks he speaks very good English. And at first, he didn't really feel comfortable asking him. But after he got through that, he asked, and it turned out to be an amazing conversation. The guy he asked was absolutely flattered that he asked him. So I'm saying all of this because community is so important.
So important. It is.
Yes, so important. And I really like your idea of having a therapist with a similar culture and
Yeah.
background because especially here in the States, some people might be like, "Oh, that might be, like I'm being standoffish." No. It's hard. It's hard to come here or an English speaking country and you come from a culture that is the exact opposite, you know? So having that similarity is I love that.
And I forgot to add one other thing. there is another network that I just joined, and it's a community, excuse me, that is specific to anybody who is an immigrant, anyone who is a person of color. It's called inclusivetherapist.com. And this specific network caters to people of color, caters to immigrants, caters to individuals who are going through a transitional phase and feeling that they don't have a community, they don't have connection. And this is a beautiful place that I recently found and joined. So I just wanted to also add that and share that as well, because it can be a
Thanks.
struggle finding someone within your culture and your community. So why not go
Mhm.
to a place that caters to you?
Absolutely. And is this just for therapists?
Well, this is a place that anyone who needs a therapist can go. So I'm on there personally as a therapist, as a coach. And so
Okay.
anyone who's looking for someone, there's filters. So you can filter through what type of the person identifies, how they identify, if they identify as an immigrant, if they identify as whatever their race, whatever their culture. So you can really filter through and find exactly someone who fits you.
Oh, that's fantastic. I will definitely put that in the description.
Mhm.
Okay, now what are some actionable steps healthcare professionals can take to better understand the cultural backgrounds of their patients and colleagues?
I would say that actionable steps they can take is to do some of their own research on who it is they're working with. And also don't be afraid to ask questions and say, it's more so about how you word things and taking that step into saying, I really would love to get to know you more and learn more about your culture, how we can connect. I really would like to connect with you. You know, just ask questions. I feel a lot of the times that individuals that I work with who are in this new environment, they feel like sometimes their colleagues are afraid to ask them questions or to learn about them. I think that's really important. So, colleagues helping to have your colleagues who are maybe immigrants or learning a new language, a new culture, don't be afraid to reach out to them and say, hello, I would love to learn about your culture. I would love to learn about you. How can we connect more together? Because that will welcome them and help them to feel more at home in this new environment that they're in.
Yeah, that makes sense to just do a little bit of a research because I was working with
Mhm.
someone, they were from Russia and they were in a meeting and there was some kind of like Russian joke that was made, like they were
And
a spy for the government. And he said it was very, very funny. But he
mhm.
said he couldn't understand why it was so funny. So he was like, this cultural differences, he said it was hard. So he was like, he laughed because everyone else was laughing, but he was just like, Devin, why is this so funny? Like, why is everybody cracking up?
Yeah.
So yeah, it's just those little nuances could really make or break a difference.
hmm
Now, you said that your father was an immigrant. I know that you were born here, but do you have any stories or anything that's happened that your father saw in regards to something that happened and if he overcame it?
Well, he didn't speak too much specifically about his struggles in the workplace, I would say, but
Hmm.
I did notice, even for me, just when I had conversations with him, it was a struggle hearing him sometimes or understanding what he was saying to me. So I can only imagine how it would feel for him actually being a therapist, being a psychologist, and working with, English speaking patients and they could maybe have the same struggles as I had. And um, I know that I personally have when I had colleagues that had a very strong accent, just seeing their frustration and wanting to say things. And there was another area I remember I spoke to a specific colleague about. We were having a conversation and I remember them saying to me, um, can you hold a moment? Because I have to translate this in their
Hmm.
mind. and how
Mhm.
they would say it from their language to English. And they would say things like, well, I don't know how I say this in English. And they would try to describe to me what it was like they were trying to say. And I can see how that can be frustrating as well, and I just said to them, it's okay, take your time. Just having them being able to know that they're not going to be judged, because I know that can be very, very emotional and uncomfortable, a feeling of being stuck and trying to figure out a way to say things, but you only know how to say it in your language and trying to translate it to English can be frustrating.
Yeah, and that's something that we at the academy really try to drive home is to
Mhm.
think in English. That'll help so much instead of trying to translate, because when
Mm,
people translate in their native language, it causes so many problems.
yeah.
So it's a muscle that people need to build because people have been extremely fluent. They've been doing this for years. So making the switch to think in English, it can take some time. But
Yeah.
again, it's like a muscle. So for those of you who are listening and you're struggling with this, think in English. So, for example, when you think of the word stethoscope, don't think of it in your native language. Think of it in English. Think of stethoscope, and that will help so much with speaking in real time.
Yes. That's so
Yeah, so
true.
that makes so much sense.
Okay.
How can non-native English speaking healthcare professionals build confidence when communicating with patients and team members?
Yes. So building confidence is definitely an area that I have seen, like when I work with patients that are immigrants and in their areas of struggle. It's just a process. That's my response to them. It's a process. It takes time. And it's really easy to beat yourself up and say, oh, I'm stupid or I'm ignorant now. And I remind them, no, this is a transition, because I work with people in transitional phases of their life as a coach. And we work through these transitional phases that you go from one cultural environment and into a whole nother world. And it can be scary. So what I like to do is normalize what's happening, and normalize it by saying, it is completely fine that you're feeling this way. This is the way that anyone coming from a new environment would feel. And then sometimes I bring some things in and say, when I went from living in a uncomfortable situation where, I sometimes have to self-disclose, when I was in my car, living in my car temporarily, transitioning into living in an apartment, it felt scary. It felt weird. And I can only imagine how weird it feels for you going to one environment to another. And you have, this is a new place and you don't know what to do, what to say around people. And a lot of times I would like to add is there could be some post traumatic stress that happens as well, because there's this fear, could be some social anxiety that comes into play. So normalizing that by saying things like, look, social anxiety can happen because you're in a place that you don't feel comfortable in and you don't know. And you can have post traumatic stress. I mean, depending on what you're going through, depending on your environment, your cultural differences, and let's say religion that could come into play, like the jokes you mentioned. Somebody could be making a joke and you feel awkward. Do I laugh at this joke? Do I stand up and say something? So having someone to support you is number one. I always say that. Having a therapist, having someone like you, Devin, to be able to say, hey, I need to reach out to you because I'm feeling uncomfortable. What do I do? And number two, don't ever feel like you have to go through this alone. You're not alone. That's the one thing I could say that's really important that I want to say. Anytime you're in this situation, remember you're not alone. There's people there that want to support you, people there that want to help you and to help you to transition into this phase so you don't have to feel like an outside.
That's amazing. I love your advice because it's so actionable, you know?
Mhm,
And
mhm.
before I continue, I just want to say that's incredible that you went from living in your car to where you're at now. I mean,
Mhm.
that's amazing.
Yeah.
It's amazing. Now, I do want to share this just because this is like what we're talking about. So I was working with someone, this is a while ago, He was a personal client. He was from a very reserved culture. Not going to say the country or the culture.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember he logged in and he was feeling really anxious and he like really uncomfortable. And I was like, "Hey, what's wrong?" And he was like, "Devin, I need to ask you something, but I don't know how you're going to respond to this, but I really don't know who I'm going to ask." And I said, "Please, I'm here. I'm here as a resource. Please ask me." And he said that he was working with me because he was moving to LA. He was a doctor.
Mm-hmm.
And so this is what he said. He said, "Devin, I just found out that my boss and my boss's boss are both women. And I come from a very remote village in my country, and we have very strong societal norms where the men lead and the women submit. Now, I've never had a woman boss before, so I don't know how to handle this. So can you help me with this? Because I don't want to be labeled that guy from that country. So
Yeah.
can you please help me?" And I had to give him props because I just thought that was so honest, you know? That was
Mm-hmm.
so honest and very
Yeah.
vulnerable and very candid. So I told him, I said, "I'm not offended at all. You come from a culture where the men lead, and the fact that you are coming to America and you're going to have two bosses, that's a big shift." And so,
Yeah.
anyway, I'm not going to go into everything that I told him, but I gave him very solid advice and he was really grateful. He was so scared that I was gonna hate his guts or, I didn't wanna work with them anymore, and I said, "Absolutely not. I want to help you because you're trying. You are trying." And so
Mm.
anyway, he came over here and now he's thriving. So,
Wow.
yes, asking for help can make a huge
Huge.
difference. Yeah.
Yes.
All right. So as we wrap up, what vital advice would you give to healthcare professionals who feel overwhelmed by cultural or language challenges in their careers?
I would say in closing, you really have to find your tribe because anytime you're in a new environment, new experience, if you just stay to yourself and try to do everything alone and say, "Oh, I'm just going to get through this by myself. Like I can figure it out." Or um there could be some cultural foundations of being weak if you ask for help. That's another big thing. Depending on the culture, your upbringing, gender, there could be things that you're brought up with, and those things could interfere with you asking for help, And I would say the most important thing is find your tribe, find someone that you can connect with that can give you a peaceful place of vulnerability and you're not going to feel judged. I guess I can just always say go to a therapist because obviously I'm a therapist and I'm a coach. However, also someone like you, Devin, that specializes in helping this transitional phase. I can't say enough. Don't be ashamed to find someone to work with that looks like you or has your same cultural background. I know personally that when I'll do intake calls before I officially have a patient on the clinical side. And I was in an intake call, and I remember it was a Latino man and woman who were a couple, and they were afraid to say, I really wanted a Latina therapist. And I told them, I said, look, this is completely fine. It makes sense that you want someone from your own culture and your community. I respect that. And I want you to have that. And I just had to explain to them at the specific clinic that they didn't have anyone available. However, I wanted to do my best as a clinician of color to support them. So I would say that finding your people, finding your tribe here in this new environment in the States, find a therapist, find a support group that is a community with people that you're similar with or you're comfortable with, or, a community that you identify with, because that can help a lot. They can change everything for you. trying to do everything by yourself and feeling like, oh, I'm weak if I ask for help, it's only going to make things harder. And it's not, it doesn't have to be that way. It really doesn't.
Yeah, that makes so much sense. All right, now where can people find you?
So yes, so everyone can find me on my website, mayadajon.com or chillvibrations.com with an S, chill vibration.
All right, and those will be in the description box. So, Maya, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me. I really loved having this conversation because I feel it's not had enough. People aren't discussing the transitional phases that individuals go through when they have to move to a new culture, new environment, and when they're an immigrant and having to struggle. And it's an important conversation to have, and we should normalize this conversation so more people feel comfortable speaking up about it.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And to piggyback off of what Maya was saying, if you are trying to find your tribe, please join us in the Academy. It's a free community. Anyone in healthcare can join. We have members from all over the world, so many different cultures and backgrounds, and we are all focused on the same thing, which is to bridge your English language gap so that way you can communicate effectively. We have this thing, like I said, called 1 Minute English, where you can get a bite sized little nugget of English every day. So that way you don't have to spend too much time on it. We also have free events that's available for anyone in healthcare. The link is in the description. And thank you very much for tuning in, and I'll see you next time.